Okay, Rabbi Say, here we go. Multi-level burial. A phenomenon that we see in Eretz Yisrael, Har Hamenuchos most famously for most listening. Something that hasn't gotten to most places in Chutz La'aretz. Is that okay? Is it mutter? Is it asur? Lichatchila b'di'evet? Come listen and find out. The Chassam Sofer says that there's a minhag to spend money and own your burial plot. Tzarichin, why? We see that Avram Avinu only bought the burial plot after Sarah was Nifteris. Tzarichin, but Lamais, the Chassam Sofer says there's an inyan to own your own burial plot. Is a remez that we see in Sechtas Nida. It says, Eim psichas a kever beloy damim. That's talking about when a woman's kever, her rechem, opens up. We assume that blood went out, but there's a remez in there that we don't have the opening of a kever, we don't have the opening of a burial spot without damim, without paying for it. You're going to pay to get a spot. The Kav Yasher brings down that there's an inyan to be buried next to tzaddikim. And he also brings down that there's an inyan to daven next to your own kever, obviously before you pass away. And there's an inyan to learn Torah next to your kever, once again, before you pass away. They say that buying a kever, buying a burial plot is a skula for arichas yamim. You buy a kever, you get to live long. They asked the stapler, Efa Katuv, where's that written? Where is it written that buying a kever is a skula for arichas yamim? And the stapler said, I don't know. I don't know where it's written, but if they say it, they say it, and that's what they say. So if that's what they say, there's probably something to it. But Lamaisa, anyways, buying a kever is still a real estate investment. So even if it's not a school for arichas yam, it's definitely a nice thing. There's definitely an inyan, and it's even a real estate investment. It usually goes up. Which reminds me of a story that I remember once I was at a children's store with a friend of mine whose father died when he was young, and we met on a Thursday night, and we met somebody there, we're schmoozing, and the guy asked my friend, so what does your father do for a living? My friend didn't want to make this new acquaintance feel bad, so he said, oh, my father? Yeah, he's in real estate. Oh, where? Yeah, somewhere in New Jersey. Oh, okay, interesting. That was, I guess, midas tovos of a friend of mine, but there was some truth into that, because there's definitely an element of real estate investment when it comes to a kever. Okay. L'maisa in Eretz Yisrael, they have a big problem. What is the problem? The problem is Eretz Yisrael is a very, very densely populated country. In Eretz Yisrael, there's tons and tons of people in a relatively small area. There's 9 million Jews in a relatively small area. And the problem is only getting worse. Why? Because, as we know, the Yidden have children. The birth rate in Eretz Yisrael is the highest in the Western world by far. And some people think it's just a Haredi thing, that the Haredim have 7 children plus per family. Even the Chalonim have a birth rate way above everywhere else in the Western society. So therefore, since we're growing and we're growing and we're growing, Baruch Hashem, we have a problem of where we're going to bury everybody. Because once again, Eretz Yisrael is a small area. And if it's a small area, we're going to run out of place to bury. Just to put this in perspective, Har Hamenuchos, they say, has around 150,000 people buried there. And it's almost full. Har Hazeisim has approximately 160,000 people buried there, and it is almost full. Right now, there is in Yerushalayim 1 million people live in Yerushalayim, and there's at least another 500,000 people from different places in the world that want to be buried in Yerushalayim. So if there's 1.5 million people today that plan to be buried in Yerushalayim, and 300,000 spots are taking up the high majority of the 2 places to be buried, we got a problem. Simple math says there's a problem. In Eretz Yisrael at large, there's around 9 million Jews. There's around, in Chutz La'aretz, 8 million Jews. Let's say 10% of them want to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. I don't know if it's that much. But we're talking about 10 million people. And once again, the birth rate's only growing. And there isn't close to that amount of space to bury everybody currently. So, based on this problem, as well as, obviously, the potential for serious financial gain, so the investors and engineers and architects and etc. and Chevra Kadisha got together and they devised a plan. They're going to build multi-level kfura. I remember the first time I saw this, it was very shocking. And I know a lot of people in Chutz La'aretz have never seen this and don't realize it. But in Har Hamenuchos, they started building all over the place these multi-level burial spots. Now, as you're going to hear soon, there's lots of different types of different multi-level burial spots. Lots of different types of kfura. I heard that there's 26 different variations. Now, I could not figure out. When I made a cheshbon, I did not get the 26, but I heard the claim that there's 26. I don't know if it's really true that there's exactly 26, but the claim is made. I found there to be a good 8, 9, 10 different variations. So we're going to start off discussing what definitely originally was the most popular one, and the first one to hit the market, so to speak. And that's what they call in Eretz Yisrael, kfura b'komot. Kfura on floors, a multi-level kfura. Now, a lot of people say it resembles parking lots or apartment buildings, and there's different people buried on different levels. Now, for those who have never seen this, I brought a little picture to make it easier to see. For those on the see the multi-levels, see that it's you see different levels, the higher and the lower. So there's people buried on each of these levels. Here, you can pass it around that for people to see that the different levels of burial. Over here, instead of people just being in the ground, there are different levels. Now, when you are in there, and I've been to Levias in these parking lots, multi-level, kfur b'komot on floors. When you're there, it looks like a normal burial. They dig the dirt. There's a hole in the ground, and there's dirt on the side. They put the nifter inside. They cover with dirt, and it seems very natural. You don't see when you're on that floor. You don't see that there's floors below you. You could see over an edge, but also sometimes when you're on a hill on Har Hamenuchos, you're at an edge and you can look over. So it doesn't look any different. The only thing that looks different is there's a ceiling above you. So actually, that could be very convenient sometimes. Sometimes in Eretz Yisrael, summer Levaya is very hot. Over here, you're in the shade. If it's raining, you have the ceiling on top of you blocking the rain. And if you're at a night Levaya, there's lights right on top of you. There's light fixtures on the ceiling, which is able to provide light. So once again, in America, they usually don't have night levayas, but in Eretz Yisrael, we all know here that night levayas are very common, and when you have lights, it certainly makes life a lot easier. So, sounds like a very innovative solution for a very serious problem. And obviously, the people that are building this, there's a lot of money to be made, because they go usually around 5 stories high. So instead of, in each square foot, or each however many square feet a caver is, instead of burying one person, you get 5. So it seems like a very lucrative idea. The question, obviously, is this allowed? I remember it was shocking to me the first time I saw this. But I thought you can't bury somebody on top of another person. Is that true? Is that not true? I don't know. I had that reaction when I first saw it. So let's look into this. Let's think about this. So the Torah says, "Tzarech lekivroi bikarka v'lo yitnena ba'orim shenemer cover tikverenu." So kfura is a mitzvah deraisa that you need to bury someone, and as the Torah puts it, you have to bury somebody in the karka and not put somebody in an aron without burying them. As the pasuk says, kever tikverenu. So we see two extremes. Buried in karka is good. Just sticking somebody in an aron is no good. In a coffin is no good. And therefore, somebody who just puts somebody into an aron without burying them is over on halanas hameis. There's a word for this in English, a mausoleum, where they just go and they stick people in like coffins, and they don't bury them. It's a room filled with coffins, a mausoleum, and that would be a isser of halanas hameis. You have to either put somebody in the ground or in cuchin. We're going to see in Chazal. In the ground is, classic our burial, that we put them in the ground, put the dirt on top. Cuchin is some form of in the wall. And we'll learn more about that coming up. So the Ramban says, you're over halanas hameis when you put the body in a coffin and you don't bury it at all. He seems to be showing that there's some in between which might be okay. So definitely mausoleum is a big problem. We have a Gemara in Sanhedrin that says that a kivrei binyan, it talks about a kivrei binyan, whatever the focus of the Gemara there isn't important, but there's something called a kivrei binyan, a built-up caver, a built-up burial spot, which is okay, for sure is okay in the Gemara. What is a kivrei binyan? Rashi explains it's banu lemala min karka. It's some form of caver that's built above the ground. The Or Zarua, he's even more mefresh. He explains caver binyan is another rishon for those that are unaware. Loi chafer bekarka ela bana al gabe karka. It's not dug into the ground, rather it's built up on top of the ground. And we can even see in the Meiri, it's bana al ha-karka. It's built on the karka. So we certainly see from the Rishonim, there is a concept of a caver which is above ground. So there's a lot of people out there kicking and screaming and saying there was never such a thing of building above ground. It never existed. It isn't true. How could you make something up? We see from the Rishonim that there definitely was. They explained the Gemara was talking about a caver binyan. They explained the Gemara is talking about this concept of a building on top of ground. So it certainly seems to exist. However, there is a Yad Ramah who explains the caver binyan in a different fashion. He says that a caver binyan is something which is tiled in the ground, meaning you dig into the ground, and instead of just putting the body on the dirt, you tile the floor and then put the body. L'chayra, the Yad Ramah is going la'afuke, all the Rishonim that we said until now, and the Yad Ramah would hold it has to be underground. But all the other Rishonim that I just said, namely the Meiri, Rashi, the Or Zarua, and I'm going to quote the Rambam and Paris from Mishnayos, didn't quote yet, but I'm going to quote in a second, hold that it could be above ground. Once again, the Rambam and Paris from Mishnayos, he's explaining what on the Mishnah what's kuchin and what's kfaris, and he explains kfaris. We really understand that usually the opposite, tzarchin. He explains kfaris to mean it's a caver al ha-karka. A kfaris is al ha-karka. So it seems to be most Rishonim seem to hold there is a concept of building above ground. So whoever thinks that once it's above ground, it's automatically pasuled, is l'chayra not right. Now, somebody could claim, when it comes to kfura, who wants to get involved in machlokes rishonim? Do you want to be buried in a place where the Yad Ramah says is a pasul kfura? Granted, accepted. But that's a very different type of tone to say we've never seen anything like this, to say you're not being mekayim all shittas rishonim. And I understand there is a mile of getting all shittas rishonim, but you can't tell me that if you don't get all shittas rishonim, you have nothing. The Levush says Halacha l'Meisa that you can bury in a building above ground, and the Shulchan Aruch as well brings down that you could bury above ground. He brings down he's not actually talking about as a first he's talking about without getting too involved what he's talking about, but he says, by a kaver shel binyan, ... So if by a kaver shel binyan, ... it means he holds of a kaver shel binyan. Okay. The kanoim against this concept, and by the way, I'm not going to come out so good necessarily, but just to explain, the kanoim who are against this like quoting this Ran. There's a Ran that says you have to put him in the karka and not a arin, because it's the greatest geniza to be put in the karka. So first of all, we see one new point, which is a very key factor, which we might have assumed anyways, but you see first in the Ran. The point of a kvura is for geniza. It has to be this body is being put away somewhere where it's away. It's totally away. A coffin could be opened, but in the ground is the greatest geniza. It's the greatest put away, and therefore you should put the body in the ground and not in a coffin. Now, just saying because the Ran said big karka, therefore he holds it has to be in the ground, l'chayra is like reading half of the line of the Ran without reading the full line of the Ran. Because he's going la fuke, doing it in a aron. There's a shita of Rav Chama that holds you're allowed to put a body in an aron. So he's going la fuke the shita. He's saying do it bikarka and not in the aron. If he held that it had to be bikarka and not above ground, he would say put in the karka and not a kfura above ground, in dirt above ground. He was going lafuki, the two extremes which we see across the lashonis of the Rishonim, because they're going lafuki, the shita of Rav Chama that says it could be put in a coffin. So therefore, l'chayra, there's no raya from the Ran that there's a problem with kfura above ground. And in fact, I would say, you see from the Ran, the main focus is geniza. So if it has geniza, if the body's tucked away in a way that you're not going to be able to get to the body, l'chayra, it should be good. Also to note, the Besamim Rosh, I forgot to say this before, the Besamim Rosh says that you could have burial above ground. Once again, we've discussed in the shiur before how the Besamim Rosh is a debatable maramakim, because the authenticity of whether the Rosh really wrote the Besamim Rosh or whether it was a later forgery is very debatable. Many believe that it wasn't the Rosh who wrote the Besamim Rosh. So the degree of authority, there's what to debate. Now, a lot of people, I guess we'll call them the Kanayim on this topic, will quote Rav Moshe as saying Rav Moshe has some really sharp, starker things to say about the people that bury in a mausoleum. And it's like you left the nifter in the street and it's horrible and the people are going to pay and it's horrible. And so they like to quote that about the Kfur Komot. I think that that's not so simple. Because Rav Moshe was talking about a mausoleum. Rav Moshe was never discussing the Sheila of Kfur Komot. Why? Because there was no such thing as Kfur Komot. So they never asked Rav Moshe about Kfur Komot. He's clearly, you read the tshuva, he says clearly, mausoleum. You check out, go to a dictionary. What is a mausoleum? A mausoleum is where you put the aron in a room. Nothing to do with buried. So therefore, to say the lashonis of Rav Moshe are referring to this is a big stretch. That's not what he was talking about. And therefore, it's a little misleading to use the Rav Moshe on this. I'm not saying Rav Moshe would agree. And I'm not saying he'd be matter. I have no idea what Rav Moshe would say. But to say that all the sharp lashonis of Rav Moshe are talking about this is nish pasha. Okay. Fine, so that's about the above ground versus in the ground. And I would add one more point. There's a Beis Yitzchak that says, I'm not saying everybody holds of this Beis Yitzchak, but it also is helpful to do this, who says anything attached to the ground is considered like part of the ground. You know, we have this in Hilchas Shabbos. You know, messing around with a doorknob is a problem. We treat it like it's karka, even though it's a small item. Anything that's attached to the wall, which is attached to the house, which is attached to the ground, has a din like the ground.
So mausoleum is attached to it,
No, but the mausoleum, the coffins are sitting there. They're not attached to anything, the coffins. They're sitting in a property that's attached to the ground. Whereas these structures are surely attached to the ground. So the feet of Beis Yitzchak, one could argue, this is in the ground. I agree that is not, certainly what's a debate against that argument. I'm not coming to say that that's a conclusive argument, but there certainly is a tzad to it. It would be something that could help the argument of being mater this kfura. The next question is that what about burying one on top of the other? Is that allowed? Are you allowed to bury one on top of the other? So there's actually some early tshuvas from Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan, that was the Rav of Kovna, Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan Spector, where he writes, the Metzias was, the Goyim had allotted them certain space, the Goyish government, for their kfura. And the basic verse filled up pretty much, and they didn't have anywhere else to bury. So Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan said, what you should do is put 6 tefachim above the cemetery, put a new fresh layer of dirt of 6 tefachim above the cemetery, dig to the normal height that you dig to bury, and now another level of burial. So now we have a second layer of burial on top. And Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan writes, this was common practice. I'm not being mechadish something new. This is the old minhag of what to do. So we see that we did bury one on top of the other. And you can actually see it in the Shulchan Aruch, Yordea, Shin Samach Beis, Sif Daled. It says you could bury one on top of the other as long as you have 6 tefachim. So it's pretty much a first Shulchan Aruch. So, and even if you want to say that they never did it, well, Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan says they did do it. Just to note, there's a Goyas Rabbi Akiva Eiger in the Shulchan Aruch over there who quotes the Sefer Chasidim as only requiring 3 tefachim in between one mace and another, not 6 tefachim. But Lamaisa, Psak Shulchan Aruch 6 tefachim, I would want 6 tefachim. But there is a Rabbi Akiva Eiger quoting the Sefer Chasidim that says 3 tefachim in between one caver and the next would suffice. Now, there's something about me that doesn't feel comfortable with this, but L'maisa, it seems to be mutter. So what do you want me to say? It seems to be mutter. Okay, there's another maramakim that's important over here. There's a Gemara in Sanhedrin that's asking, what is the focal point of kfura? Is it kapara, or is it bizayin? Is it to take away the bizayin of the nifter? Is it to give the nifter kapara, or to take away the bizayin? In explaining the kapara, why would kfura? Where's the kapara in kfura? It's very pashut. Where's the bizayin? It takes away the bizayin when you bury the dead. But where's the kapara? So Rashi has a lashon. I wrote it down over here. Ki hechi dahave kapara b'hatmana zu moridin umashpilin b'tachtiyos. It's when you go and you lower the body b'tachtiyos, in the underness. However, exactly we translate that word tachtiyos. It's by lowering the body in the tachtiyos, that's what creates the kapara. So is this multi-level burial, are you lowering the body b'tachtiyos? Now, one could argue it's not b'tachtiyos because you're above ground. Once again, these inyanim are hard to really know what the kapara min hashamayim is by lowering the body. But I would argue you are doing it b'tachtiyos, because you are, from where you're standing, you're lowering the body below the ground of where you're standing. So you are putting it b'tachtiyos. And if you want to start telling me about, tachas, you're up high. We know from Chazal, we learn a little Chumash, and everybody's buried in a mountain. And we don't say, that's a chasar b'tachtiyos, because you're buried in a mountain. Because even when you were buried in a mountain, you were put down. And if you're put down, nobody said, Har Hamenuchos is the problem. I need Har Hamenuchos. No, nobody has a problem with Har Hamenuchos. It's okay if you're up. Nobody ever had a problem with that. So I would think, l'chayra, once again, it's hard to know exactly where the kapara is, but l'chayra, that should count. And even if it was true that you wouldn't have that element, the l'chayra wouldn't make it asr. It would just make it that you might lack some kapara, but it doesn't prove that it wouldn't be allowed. Okay. Let's for a second understand before what the official rules and requirements were by the Rabbanut to allow this burial. So they had a whole list of requirements. Now, some of the Rabbanim have lots of issues that a lot of these requirements are not being met, and certainly on the future types that I'm going to discuss in a minute are not being met. They had a requirement that you could only do this multi-level burial if there's no place for regular burial. Well, that's a very debatable point nowadays, because it's true we're baderech to running out of Har Hamenuchos, but we haven't run out yet. And there's other places in the country where they could potentially open up, but space is limited. It's a debatable point. It needs to be 1.5 meters deep. This is their original rules, and they're doing it, regular depth seemingly. They want that there's a pillar of karka. They could call it karka pasul, natural karka there's like a shaft with it coming up. Are they doing that in the Komot? As far as I know, yes. It's hard. I don't know. As far as I know, they are somewhere. It doesn't seem so complicated to have one like shaft of side. I read somewhere that they're not doing it. I'm a little unsure about that. I'm not convinced that you necessarily need it anyways, but okay. They require that you can't make pre-made cement boxes. Meaning it has to be that it's actual cement that's poured that makes the hole in the ground. Not that you're taking like a bathtub and cementing it in. So I read somewhere that they are doing that. I read somewhere else that they're not doing that. Once again, it's hard to know exactly what the Metzias is because you can't bury a Bikli. And if they would, maybe it would be a Kli, Yeshufapal. There's a little problem with this. It's very hard to be mevar with the Metzias of how they were constructed. Next is that the family needs to be explained that it's not lechatchila. That I've heard from multiple people that that's not true. The families are not being explained that it's not lechatchila, so that's a little bit of a problem. And you have to be using dirt, and they are pretty much using dirt. There's some styrofoam in there that they were doing for a while. I'm not sure if they're still doing that, which I know some Rabbanim had some issues with, but I don't know how big of an issue that is. Okay, fine. Now, Lamaisa, the Eida Charedis came out against this. They're totally against this. Rav Yashiv came out against the multi-level burial, but the reason is very different than how some people quote him. If you actually read Rav Yashiv, he wrote, the issue is we don't go against the minhag of Klal Yisrael to bury in the ground. And we don't go against the minhag of burying one on top of the other. And then on a later trivia, he brings up that, you're going to ask me, they did do it in Europe. So you see in Kovna they did it. Ein donen efsher mi efsher. They did it over there when they had no choice, they had no space. But here in Eretz Yisrael, we have space. Would it be different today? Not convinced. Because I know Rav Yashiv also told people that they could be buried in the Negev. So I think in the Negev, there is space. Sarchin, exactly what Rav Yashiv held, the Chayr Rav Yashiv would still aser today. But people come that, like, if you're Rav Yashiv, it's like you left the nifter in the street. That's pasha not true. He might just told you you're going against the minhag. Rav Vosner first came out to be matter it, and then he was chayzer and he astered it. Rav Vadia mattered it, and if you know a little bit of the way the Rav Vadia is derech psak, it's very reasonable. Rav Vadia was very into, if you learn the sugya, you go to the Shulchan Aruch, you learn the sugya, it seems to check all the boxes. It's mutter. They didn't used to do it in Europe. Rav Vadia didn't care. He said, if it works, it works. Rav Mordechai Eliyahu was also matter. Now, that's all the basic sugya. There's something that developed later on, which Rav Elyashiv has never asked the Shaila. And this is a very serious development. So once again, as I learned the sugya, I didn't think it was so bad. Maybe it's not the perfect lechatchila. But when you go through the sugya, something that I heard in a shiur from Rabbi Callis, that, and then I looked online and I saw various pictures that were showing this to be true, is the way that these parking lots look. You want to pass me that sheet again? The way that these parking lot furas look. So the rain will go in between floors. Right? In between floors, the rain will go in. And certainly on the top floor, the rain will go in. Actually, these do not have plots on the top floor. Some of them have plots on the top floor, some of them don't, on the penthouses. But these don't. But the rain will go in between floors. And what's happening is, as the rain is going in, it's soaking up the dirt that's in the kfarim, and then it's leaking through, and it's leaking through the cement, and dripping down from the ceiling from one floor to the next is dark drops, not clear drops. So they decided to start testing these drops. Some people, probably the Kanaim, and they found human DNA inside these drops of rainwater that were coming out of the ceiling of the farm on the multi-level. And they found there was blood in these drops. And I actually saw some pictures. They tried the different drainage systems to, that was 1.0. In 2.0, they worked some under the farm drainage system to drain it out. But what ended up happening is there was blood that was mixing together from all the different farm of the recent farm, at least, and coming and dripping out on the side of the structure. And you would see out of the pipe that they had like a gutter that was, and you see blood stains on the bottom of these gutters. That is a real problem. And apparently they tried 3, 4, 5 different variations of how to deal with this issue. And you might think put a big roof on the top with a gutter. The problem is, in these areas, there's farm on the bottom. They can't let all the water soak into the bottom because it's just going to soak up other farm, and a caver can't be fully soaked with water. What happens in a regular caver? It goes through the caver, and there's probably blood. I imagine it is going down further, and it's going into the ground. There's no bizayin there. There's no lack of geniza. Over here, to have blood and whatever dripping from out of the bodies of the nifter is for sure bizayin hames. And some want to say it's b'chal not kfura. It's not geniza. Geniza, kfura, is you put it in a way where the body can't get out. Over here, the body is getting out. So this is a real issue. And l'chayr, this is until they find the solution, and I know they keep on trying. And until they find the solution for this is a real issue. This kind of takes what we said now as a nice limud, but this is mamash a problem. I don't know how long a body still maintains its moisture. It could be, you have to ask somebody who knows. I don't know who knows. It could be that if you bury in the beginning of the summer, by the time the winter comes, there's no longer any of that moisture in the body to ooze out. I don't know. I asked Google how long it takes for a body to turn into a skeleton, and they said with a cough in 10 years, without a cough in 5 years on average. But I still don't know when it dries up. I didn't find that out exactly. Okay, I don't know. All right, so fine. Let's sum this up. The multi-story parking garage that we're discussing. So, is it ganas outside of the last leaking issue? It's ganas. Is that considered bekarka according to most Rishonim? Yes. Maybe the Adramah? No. Do you have b'tachtiyos Rashi? B'pashtus? Yes, but it's debatable. And even if you don't have it, it's probably kosher kfura. It just lacks an element of kapara. But past just the dirt doesn't need to be in its natural state, and it's not a problem that the dirt comes from elsewhere. They're burying in dirt, that's fine. There was some outside styrofoam that they were using. I think that was to try to contain the liquid from dripping out, which I think was a failed attempt. It's still fine because around the nifter is dirt, but I know there was some hack on it, and to be honest, I didn't really understand it. Going against the minhag is a potential issue, but I wouldn't say that it's necessarily a game changer issue because it's a debatable point. Obviously, we would want the most lichatchila kfura for our relatives, but we're just discussing, is it okay l'chayra that? But this last issue, the leaking issue, I would say that's a game changer, and that makes this a real problem unless we hear that they actually found a solution that really works. Okay, now, that was stage 1. Then they came up with stage 2.0 of overground burial, and they came up with, some of them call it sanhedrin burial, and some of them call it cuchin, which is on the walls. I'll show you there's a lot of variations. I'll show you a clear picture of something that I found over here. They build like these shelves where you go in feet first, actually, into these things over here. And, eventually when they close it, it looks like that. And these are the cuchin space. They're above ground structures where they're connected to the ground. And what they do is they have in the middle a layer of dirt all the way up to the top. So each spot is connected to dirt, which is connected to the ground, and the person goes in. It's very efficient spatially, because where you used to be able to put one person, you could put 3 or 4 people. So therefore, it's very space efficient, and okay. So is this allowed, this type of grave? Now one could argue that this seems a lot like a coffin. When you look at this, the previous kfura that I told you, when you look at it, you go to a levaya on the parking garage. It looks like a regular levaya. You're putting the body down. You're covering it with dirt like a normal levaya. Over here, the first time I went to kfura with one of these, it's actually very shocking. They go and they take the body, they slide the body in on some gurney type thing, and they just close the door. And that's it. They flip in a bag 2 or 3 of dirt, and that's it. There's no burial, seemingly. So this, one could argue that it looks like you're just putting the body in a coffin. That's not buried. And to get somebody out, they end up cementing the door closed, but you just have to crack the door open. You don't have to undig the whole body. I think we would agree that if you would take a coffin and you would put a lock on, put a master lock on the coffin, that's a problem. But one could argue it's gunas. It's hard to know. We don't have such mefurish on this. But the argument to allow these are lemaisa. It's attached to the ground. It's gunas. You can't get out. And therefore, apparently in the time of Chazal, they used to put people in caves in the walls. I know I've gone to some hikes in the Beit Shemesh area, where in the middle of the hike you hit some of these kfarim, and you can walk in and you see these caves, and you see these matzevas all over the walls of these caves, and that seems like a similar idea. However, this is somewhat of a man-built variation. So is this okay? So I don't know. This much quicker to hear the argument of the Kanayim to say that this is just a coffin. But one could argue, listen, it's made of cement. Cement has din dirt, but they're not putting much dirt on it. You push the cement. I could hear the argument that cement is, the main ingredient of cement is dirt. So what's the difference? But it's kind of built clean. I would say this is much more difficult than the previous Shaila. And what about tachtiyos? I hear the argument that you don't have tachtiyos to Rashi. You're not putting them down. You slide them in. If you slide them in and you're not putting them down, I could hear why that would be an issue. The counter argument is, listen, it's attached to the ground. We have the dirt in the back. It's touching the dirt, and it's like the ground. I would also note that they do not have the 6 tvachim between from one caver to the next caver. 6 tvachim is, I wrote down over here how much it is. It's around 60 centimeters is 6 tvachim, and it's what is that in inches? I wrote down what that was in inches. Well, you know how many inches it is? 30 inches or something like that? 24 inches? I think it was 24 inches. I don't remember where I wrote it down. I think it's 23, 24 inches. So it's like this amount, yeah? Over here, you look. You do not have that amount in between one cave and another. There is some ear space in between, which you put there's a tefach of airspace in between the nifter and the ceiling above. That's fine, but l'chayr you don't have in between one and the other the 6 tvachim. L'chayr you don't even have 3 tvachim. Maybe you have 3 tvachim. Looks not pashut. So therefore, I could definitely hear an argument against these freestanding cuchin. Okay, now as developed in this game, they developed the next stage. The next stage was the underground tunnel, which I believe is not open yet for burial, but it's going to be opening very, very soon for burial. They're Komot done. You'll see some pictures in a second. This is the entrance to the cave that goes under Har Hamenuchos. So this is by the entrance for Har Hamenuchos. You make a left off that road, if you know what I'm talking about, and you go around and you go in those caves. See that? You pass it around. And when you go in, this is actually how it looks already. So it's almost ready to open. It's mamish almost ready to open, and it looks very, very nice actually. They have well air conditioned, temperature control, and you have on the floor on the bottom there's going to be regular, seemingly in-floor burials, and the walls are lined up with these cuchin. So it's going to be 3 stories, I believe, and each story. It's 3 stories, and each story has, it looks like, 4 levels of cuchin. So you're going to have, what do you want to ask?
It looks like there's also bigger separation between the cuchin there.
It could be this bigger separation, right? It looks more than that picture. I do agree, it does look more than that picture. The question is this, it doesn't look like 12 tvachim to me, but this looks like it might get to 3 tvachim. I was thinking about driving, maybe I'll do it this week, driving down there to see if they'll let me in to check it out. Maybe if I go with a frock and one of you guys want to be my gabbai, maybe they'll let me in to inspect it. Or maybe actually Dafka, they won't let me in that way. Maybe I should go in as an American investor. Maybe they'll let me in to go take a peek and check it out. But this might have 3 tvachim. I don't think it has 6 tvachim, but I think you're right. The first picture that I showed doesn't look like it has 3 tvachim. This looks like it does. But you can see why this is economically makes sense. That you're going, for each level, there's 12, it's a height of 12. 3 floors, 4 each of these cuchin. And it looks very nice, very modern. And if you know anything about Eretz Yisrael levayas, summer levayas and rain levayas, it's going to be very, very convenient because there's air conditioning, there's shade, temperature controlled, elevators, and it's going to also have lights. So by a night levaya, it's going to be much easier. It's well lit. So it's very interesting. It'll be much easier for old people to attend levayas and for old people to go to kfarim. Right now in Har Hamenuchos, it's very difficult for old people to get to most kfarim. Over here, it will be much easier. Is this allowed? So let's take a step. Let's think about one at a time. L'chayra, the in-floor burial on the bottom. If you pass that back, the picture. Oh, you know what? Actually, I have a different picture. This is how the future are expecting it to look once it's full. It's the same place, but this is how they expect it to look when it's full. So these in-floor burials over here, l'chayra, they're ganz fine. They're in the floor. They're going to be a regular, normal style burial. There's one issue that we're going to discuss in a minute, but outside of that one issue we discussed in a minute, l'chayra, it's very good. However, what about these kuchim on the side? So are they the same as the previous kuchim, which I wasn't very happy with, or are they different? So actually there's two different types of kuchim, or maybe there's more than two, but there's two that I know of that they made there. One is the kuchim that you see on the top of this picture. During the construction, these are the round ones. The round ones were actually drilled into stone. So the ones that were drilled into the stone and you're being put into the actual cave, into the actual underground cave stone, l'chayra, this is very similar to what they did in the times of the Gemara, that they put you into the stone and you flip some dirt on and l'chayra, you're good. The Kanayim still would argue against this because you don't have dirt. But l'chayra from the Mekayris, I didn't see that you really need dirt. So one could argue these are really ganz fine. Now you still have the issue one on top of the other, but if you look over here actually, in these pictures, once again, it seems like there's a lot of different types. It's hard to say for sure. But if you see these pictures, what would we say? That's a quarter the size of the construction worker in between each one? Roughly a quarter the size of the construction worker. So if the construction worker is 5 feet tall, that 1 1/4, that's just roughly, that's not 6 tfachim, but that is 3 tfachim. So that is 3 tfachim. The Meister of Kiva Eger allows 3 tfachim. It's not 6 tfachim, assuming that this guy is not a midget for the picture. I don't think that was the point of the picture. And therefore it would work. And as you see in the second picture, you see they're going to go very high with these, as you know. Now there's another type of kuchim in the same tunnel, which is the bottom picture. The bottom picture, you notice, are the rectangular kuchim. These rectangular kuchim are really free-built structures that were built into, maybe attached to the wall, but they were built boxes. They weren't drilled out of the wall. They drilled the circle ones because it had to do with the drilling, it was a circular drill that drilled, so they made circles. But when they built cement boxes, it's easier to build rectangular cement boxes. So the cement boxes are rectangular. It's also easier to stack rectangles and etc. So the rectangular ones are very similar to the above ground. I would say they have the benefit that it's easier to call tachtiyos of Rashi because it still is below ground. So you might have that advantage, whereas the above ones are much harder to claim. But one could argue that this is a structure, this is not in ground. So there is I would say the rectangular ones are better than the above ground, but I still am not very comfortable. The round ones, they're pretty good because they're in ground. Once again, you don't have the 6 tfachim, which isn't so great. And also, I would point out these below ground issues, the chayra, they're not built yet, but misvara, they're not going to have any water issues because I don't think the water is it's like 150 feet below ground. Now, I don't know enough about, I guess I didn't pay enough attention to earth science to really know if this is going to be, I imagine it's not going to be an issue, any of the water down there. So the chayra, obviously, and the in-floor burial is even better because that's a proper burial. Now, there is one issue that some have raised, that it's gezela. The whole thing is built with gezela. How is the whole area built with gezela? Because above ground, there are plots. It's under the Har Hamenuchos. So above ground, there's all different plots that all these different people own. You're stealing land from the Mason. They own all the way down, and you're stealing their land to build your tunnel. How can you do such a thing? So, it's a good kasha. But l'chayra, it's not such a good kasha. L'chayra, usually when it comes to dinei mamanis, and I might be getting a little bit out of my pay grade, usually when it comes to dinei mamanis, when you purchase something, it's al das, the normal business practice. It's al das, the normal business practice of the place. And whenever there's vadabayit shaylas and bezdin. They always want to check what's the rule, what's the law. You kind of, when you buy, you agree to the rules and the law. And in Israel, if they decided with the rules and the law that counts and you're allowed to do that, l'chayra, the halacha would follow that, and that would be allowed. Because the original purchases are al das, the land. Even though some of them are before Israel as a state was created, still, the whatever is the accepted custom or accepted business, whatever, seemingly counts. But I'm not very clear on this. I think I might be a little bit out of my pay grade on the Dine Mamanis Choshen Mishpat element of that. It seems to be that most poskim were not so concerned about the Gezela issue, but there were some that were concerned. There's another type of kfura that I saw written. I was very surprised when I saw this, and I realized even like a lot of the frummer places are doing this. And to me, it was a chiddush. I never saw such a thing, but I saw they sell this type of thing in all of the Bate Kfaris. They call it a family plot or a couple plot. What is that? I always thought a couple plot is, you have, husband here, and right next door is the wife. But what it is they go and they dig one plot deep. They do it deeper than regular. And they put on the bottom the first one that passes away. They have they cover it up. And then they go and they put the second one. When the second one dies, they go and bury the second one on top. And then they bury the second one. And therefore you end up with two people being buried in this one spot. But there's sufficient space in between the first nifter and the second nifter. Is that okay? So we saw clearly from Yitzhak Chanan, we saw from the Shulchan Aruch, when you have 6 tefachim in between, it's okay. Is it lechatchila? So there's a couple of issues raised. Some want to say that it's a lack of kavod hames. And I actually hear that as being a lack of kavod hames because it doesn't, you can't even get me my own spot. You're burying, it's something that feels wrong with it. I would say the cuchin are worse, potentially. But something doesn't feel right with it. But that definitely doesn't make it usher. It would still be mutter, but there might be a lack of kavod hames. You cannot do it if it wasn't planned. I mean, you can't decide as a later afterthought that you're going to bury the top one. For 2 reasons. Number one is because you have to bury the first one deeper than a normal plot, because to have the sufficient spacing. And the second issue is that once the first one's buried, there's going to be Isser Hana on all the dirt on top of him. So now you can't use that dirt to bury the top one because there's the Isser Hana. So it's only okay if it was done, if it was planned. Now, some want to say that the top mace is a chatzitza to the matzeva. Now, I don't really exactly, I guess I don't understand the inyanim of matzeva, but it sounds funny to me. It's a chatzitza to the matzeva. Like, is that really a problem? It seems like most are not concerned about it. I leave that for the Mekabalim to know whether there's a real issue. The next point is that they say the top one doesn't get buried as deep as the minhag. Meaning it's halachically acceptable as long as there's 6 tefachim. But you're meant to be, like in Eretz Yisrael, they do 1.5 meters deep. I think in America, the famous is 6 feet under. It's a little bit less than 6 feet. 4.5, 5 feet under. But when you do these type of burials, it's halakhically fine, but it's not, they don't usually do it that it's the minhag deep. It's, let's say, 3 feet deep, the top one. So some have problems with that. I heard another thing that there's an inyan to be mispalel by a kever, especially in the yard site. So I heard someone say that the top nifter is a chatzitza to the bottom nifter. I don't know. I don't know exactly how tefillah works, but it sounds a little funny to me. Like, I think you should be able to daven to like whatever you want. Does it really work that way? What if I go on an angle? Like, I don't know. Sounds funny to me. Lamaisa, we're going to say it's not so lechatchila, but it certainly is okay. And I would certainly take the up and down burial above one of the other multi-level type burials. Okay, so what should be done? Lamaisa. So, to sum up, I would avoid the above ground kuchin. I would avoid the above ground Komot unless they figure out a solution to the leaking issue. In the tunnel, the floor of the tunnel seems to be okay. There is a little bit of that gazela issue, but it seems that it's not such a big issue. I would avoid the rectangular shaped freestanding cuchin in the underground tunnel. The round built cuchin, I would say l'chayr, they're not as good as the in-ground burial spots, but l'chayr, they're b'diavad okay. Now, what did I do over here? It sounds harsh and expensive. It sounds like I gave everybody that wants to be buried in Eretz Yisrael a big bill. So first off, you should know that Rav Yashiv says that there's no inyan to be buried in Yerushalayim. And once you go out of Yerushalayim, there's more affordable alternatives, as I'll explain shortly. Now, tachlis, what does it cost? I decided that once whoever's listening to this share, you probably want to know, okay, here, l'chila b'diavad, tachlis, how much is it? How much does it cost? Yeah, everybody's going to take the perfect spot if it's free. How much does it cost? So first of all, for the Bnei Yerushalayim, and some of those that are here, Bnei Yerushalayim, you get a free spot in your choice of cemetery as of today. So you could choose Har Hamenuchos or you could choose Har Hamenuchos. Now, if you choose Har Hamenuchos, they put you in the above ground cuchin. That's how it works today. If you choose Har Hamenuchos, you get a spot in Har Hamenuchos. Har Hamenuchos has not started building any above ground stuff. So as of today, if you choose Har Hamenuchos, you get a regularly 100% lichatchila in-ground burial. It's true that some people might be nervous about burying you, and they might only want to go visit or with the armed guard or something of the sort. But l'maisa, that's the most lichatchila way to do it. So if anybody dies in the short term in Yerushalayim, that's the way to go. If you don't want to pay for anything, you go for Har Hamenuchos and you get it. Mathematically, I cannot imagine that this is going to last for too many more years. There's no way that you're going to be able to get that in another 10 years. Har Hamenuchos is going to probably be filled, or I don't know, or they're going to stop offering it. It just doesn't make sense. But as of today, that's the eitzah for the Bnei Yerushalayim. What about the non-residents of Yerushalayim? What should you do? So here's the prices. I called the agent. It doesn't mean that this is the only prices around, but I didn't do crazy research, but I spoke to the agent. I told him, I'm not really looking to buy right now. I'm preparing a share. Let me know the hak. Tell me the prices. And this is what he told me. A sanhedrin cuchin grave in Har Hamenuchos cost 14,000 shekel. He didn't have a clear price on what the Komot for cost, so I'm not exactly sure on the price of the Komot. I imagine the Komot are more than the cuchin, but less than the regular. I don't know exactly what they cost. But the cuchin were 14,000 shekel. A regular spot, a normal spot in Har Hamenuchos, starts from 130,000 shekel. If you want to get like a better spot, closer to the Rabbanim, we're talking, it could be 200,000 shekel. But it starts at 130,000 shekel. Har Hamenuchos starts at 85,000 shekel. But it goes up substantially where you want to be. If you want to be near Chashva people, if you want to have a view of Har Bayis, it could be 150,000, 200,000 shekel. It could be 150,000 shekel in Har Hamenuchos, but it's starting at 85,000. I have a friend of mine told me that my prices is wrong because 2 years ago they got for his grandfather in Har Hamenuchos for $8,000. So I'm not sure whether things have changed dramatically or something gave in the pricing. That's the information that I got. The agent that I spoke to said 85,000. And they also looked online and it seemed the same. So either prices went up or my friend's wrong or I don't know. Okay. But that's expensive. What do? I'm not a rich guy. So Beit Shemesh cost $12,000. And as I said, Rav Yashiv said there's no Indian to be buried in Yerushalayim. In Tzvas, a regular spot in Tzvas is $13,000. So if you have no sheikh to Beit Shemesh, you want a holy city, Tzvas is a holy city. It's $13,000. And if your budget isn't so big, you could get buried in the northern Negev for $4,500. The same price as the cuchin in Har Hamenuchos, pretty much. You could get buried in a regular spot in the northern Negev. So you get in the northern Negev for $4,500. Maybe not the most exciting thing in the world, but at the end of the day, l'chatchila and halacha, so there are options on a lower budget as well. And that is what comes out. Once again, we should all be, whoever doesn't have, there's the Indian to buy. We should all be zeichet harichas yamim, and maybe they're going to open up millions of spots somewhere that will be affordable. Doesn't really look like the Metzias, but at the end of the day, the Negev is reasonable. And for those that could afford to get a spot in Har Zesim, it's a beautiful idea. Those who prefer Har Hamenuchos and could afford it, is a beautiful idea. But once again, to sum up, I would stay away from the kuchim. Lamaisa, I know Rav Avadia and Rav Mordechai Eliyahu were mater the Komos. I don't know what they would have to say about the leakage, and I don't know what they would say about the kuchim. It could be that they were mater the kuchim as well. I just don't know. I hope they were, because lots of Yidden are doing it. And with that, we end. We should all be zeicha to share in simchas.